Okay, I want to welcome you today. We're in the session called Parish Nursing, Fostering Connections and Healing. We have the wonderful hosts, Cheryle Pollock and Lanadee Lampman, and you've probably read their bio. I found out that Cheryle worked at camp where my sister worked at Moorelands Camp, which is kind of cool. and Lanadee I know from hanging around the cathedral near where I work downtown. So Cheryle started her nursing career at a rural hospital over 30 years ago and at Moorelands Camp. And she got to engage with nature. She's a person who thinks holistically about health, mind, body, and spirit. She's in her 10th year as the parish nurse at St. Nicholas Birch Cliff, awesome church. And she does nursing consulting, education, blood pressure clinics to members of the congregation and also guests at the outreach lunch program. And Lanadee, she's quite awesome. She's a retired nurse whose career was based in the community, mostly home care and palliative care. From October 2013 to 2019, she worked at part-time at St James Cathedral as the nurse. And, I've seen her in action, so bravely putting herself in the gap, I know, because she's worked with the opioid crisis and built connections among other street nurses to help folks who have been impacted by that affliction. She's retired now, and she worships up at St. Timothy's, North Toronto, but she serves on a subcommittee, so she's working hard too at the Diocesan Poverty Reduction Subcommittee. So those are our presenters for the day. Thanks so much for being here. As we're just a small group, I don't think we need to worry too much about norms. I think we're just going to go ahead with the presentation. And Leanne, Lanadee and Cheryle asked that you wait till the end to ask questions, if that's all right. So please take notes, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end.
Great.
Go ahead. Wonderful presenters, wonderful nurses, best people.
Well, I hope we live up to that. We'd like to open, first of all, we'd like to welcome and thank you for joining our talk, Leanne, today on parish nursing. And we'd like to open with a prayer. So if we could just take a moment to feel God's presence here wherever we are. Loving and tender God, touch our hearts with hope, touch our minds with clarity, touch our souls with peace, and touch our bodies with the warmth of your healing presence. Grant us courage to face the future, insight to understand life's trials, wisdom to discern how we can touch the lives of others. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as Elizabeth said, my name is Cheryle Pollock, and I am the parish nurse at St. Nicholas Birch Cliff. And along with Lanadee Lampman, the retired parish nurse from St. James, we are your presenters today. And we plan to briefly introduce you to parish nursing, talk a bit about displacement in our congregations, and finally share some of our experiences as parish nurses. And neither of us are Zoom experts, and we ask for your patience, and we are extremely thankful to Elizabeth for her Zoom expertise. As Elizabeth mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end of our chats. This is sort of a bit of we are actually around Lanadee's kitchen table, so this is more like a kitchen talk. And to begin with, Lanadee is going to share some information about parish nursing.
So parish nursing has been around since maybe the 1970s, 1980s. And the other name for it is faith community nursing, because frankly, you don't have to be Christian. You know, and parish doesn't mean anything to other people. So it is a registered nurse specialty requiring coursework, and you get a fancy certificate. So it's holistic health, that is spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, social, not hands-on nursing. I haven't given a shot or done wound care in eons. You don't want me doing that. We provided a reference list to Elizabeth that she can post that provides a couple of books and links to the National outfit, which is the Canadian Association for Parish Nursing Ministry. Anyway, it's a very rich website, tells you more than you ever wanted to know about parish nursing. And then Ontario Parish Nursing News, the Registered Nurse Association of Ontario has a group of parish nurses who meet and do wonderful things, and lots of bureaucracy if you're into that. We also have a link to the social determinants of health by the World Health Organization, because things like housing, having enough income, having enough food, all of those social determinants of health, that's what it's really about. Also, there's a link to the Diocese of Toronto Bishops Committee on Healing. Cheryle is one of our 2 reps to that. The Bishops Committee on Healing covers seniors, parish nurses, anointers. Who's the 4th?
Prayer ministry.
Lay pastoral ministers. Yes. So a favorite book of mine is Deeply Woven Roots by Gary Gunderson. And it's a book about how congregations can and do shape communities. It really focuses on as the congregation as the focus of ministry and what does the action. And he speaks of the role of congregations in weaving the roots of community and identifies the strengths of congregations. The roles of a parish nurse include integrator of faith and health, a personal health counselor, a health educator, a referral agent, a coordinator of volunteers, a developer of sports support groups, and an advocate. Over to you, both.
I would just like to add this one little thing, that every parish is different in their needs, and the parish, so every parish nursing will be slightly different because we want to, it's the needs of the parish. For example, in our parish, we're mostly seniors. So if we had a mother and tots, and we don't have a lot of mother and tots in the immediate neighborhood. So if we offered a mother and tots program, that might not go. So that's why it's particular to that, to your congregation. The overall theme of this conference is displacement. And when we were asked to participate, our first thoughts were, well, we don't work with refugees, and we don't work directly with people who are homeless. But on broadly discussing what displacement can mean, we realized that there are a number of reasons why people could be displaced. And Brian so very wonderfully explained that. At St. Nicholas, we have 3 congregations with a very small overlap. 2 services on Sundays and a midweek service are offered. And I decided to undertake an informal poll or survey at each of these services. When I asked individuals who they think about when they hear the word displacement, the overwhelming response was refugees and people who are homeless. One person told me that he said, well, I immediately am going to grade school science experiment where water is displaced when you put pebbles in a test tube filled with water. And of course, that was really not quite the response I was seeking, but it was an interesting one. Another person described displacement as not being where you are supposed to be. And I thought that that was a very interesting concept, because there are so many different factors that can contribute to a person not being where they are supposed to be or where they would like to be. Stereotypically, we do tend to think of refugees and homeless persons as being displaced. But here in Canada, right now, this year, and currently, we have Canadians who have and are being displaced from their homes, not because of unsafe political climates, but because of wildfires and flooding, and among other reasons as well. But displacement causes a person to be unable to participate fully in their community. However, in any community or congregation, people can be displaced or excluded for a variety of reasons. Limited resources, physical and mental health issues, job insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity are all a few of the factors that can cause someone to be socially displaced. Limited resources, mental health issues may prevent someone from participating fully in social functions, especially when a fee is charged. Mental health issues may limit participation, and all of this can cause isolation. High food costs affects the type of food being purchased and the quantity being purchased, and this can result in poor nutrition and result in health issues. Now, you might think that everyone in your congregation is doing okay, but everyone is affected by inflation. Incomes may be static and not keeping up with inflation. From May to October, St. Nicholas Birch Cliff offers a free adult community luncheon, and the majority of our guests are on a very limited budget. Few have low-paying jobs that cover shelter costs. However, there is little left over for food and other necessities. Most jobs are insecure, and we've even had participants who are selling furniture in order to cover their cost of shelter. Some, although they will say they have a place to live, are in actuality couch surfing, or living in a shelter, rooming house, or renting a room in a private home. And if you look on the internet, that is not necessarily the most inexpensive way to live. Many of our guests have what would be called complex health issues, in that they have multiple physical and or mental health issues. But they have three things in common. They want to feel welcome, they want to be heard, and they want to be valued. And is this not what we all want and desire? People attending our lunches are called guests. They're not clients, they're guests. We take time to listen and hear their concerns. We don't have to have any answers. They just want someone to listen to them. We call them by name and want them to know we are pleased that they have come to spend their time with us. Our aim is to hopefully lessen their feeling of displacement in society. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lanadee.
Okay, my turn. So, as Elizabeth indicated, my background, I graduated in nursing when my kids were in middle school in about 1984. And I didn't know how to look after kids and work nights at the same time. So I went into home health, which was daytime visiting, house to house. So most of my experience was home health, visiting house to house, including hospice work, house to house hospice work in Florida, and a little psych, a little this, a little that. So the question is, how did I get into parish nursing, which I hadn't even heard of in the beginning? Well, when I was a hospice nurse in the States, that was the best job ever. The hospice benefit is the best part of nursing in the States. If you're going to go to the States, go there and die and get on Medicare hospice benefit. And under the hospice benefits, you get more comprehensive care than you get with anything else. So you have a registered nurse, you have a palliative care physician, you have a social worker, you have a chaplain, and you have a PSW. And they all come to your house and work together as a team for you. It was very cool. Anyway, So when I was a hospice nurse, not on my team, but another team, there was this group of guys who lived under the Clearwater Bridge. And one of them was unwell and got identified. And the palliative care physician met with him on a park bench near the bridge and began giving him care. And the guys who lived under the bridge, every now and then they would pool their pennies and get a motel room for the night and all have a shower. I mean, they had a system here. They're camping under the bridge and they had a system. And our man got sicker and sicker, and the nurse and the social worker and the chaplain all met with him on the bench. And we did have a small inpatient facility when people became too unwell to manage at home 24/7. And towards the end, they brought him into our hospice facility. And the guys under the bridge pooled their pennies so they could phone him. And he said it was the best ever. He had a private bathroom and care and everything. And 2 days later, he died. And the social worker and the chaplain continued doing bereavement work with the guy under the bridge. And this, to me, this was like the way the world should work. Just, I really carried it with me, made such an impression. So then I moved back to Toronto because why not? And I worked for St. Elizabeth Healthcare. And just like when I worked for the VON, somehow or another, my district was up and down Bathurst Street. And it turns out, home visits up and down Bathurst Street, you get to meet all flavors of Jewish. Jewish with the lovely long curls, with the big hats, with the big furry hats, with all flavors of Jewish. And what I learned from being in the homes during the night, during the day, on holidays, with all flavors of Jewish, was that I was in the presence of people who were really, really living their faith in a way that I had never encountered before. If you're Orthodox and you're the woman who lights the candles on Friday, you have to know when sundown is. So on your fridge, you have the calendar that gives the night for sundown because it changes. If you're Orthodox and you're none of you driving on a Sabbath, then the entire extended family comes and sleeps on the living room floor on Friday night to be there through the Sabbath, so you can all be together. Probably you make your challah on Thursdays. You bake your challah and do all your special baking to have everything ready for the Sabbath. I had one family, a young family, who had 10 children. The littlest was 1.5, and the oldest was 19. And my patient was the husband. And one of his greatest sorrows was inability to do the things. Usually he was the one who said the prayer over the challah on Thursday when it was rising. And evidently there is a special prayer that you pray after you pee as you come out of the bathroom. Thank God I could pee. He was having trouble doing these instrumental things he was used to, and it was a sadness to him. Just this exposure to people who were living their faith in such a fundamental, functional way. We had one client, was a young man who went off to synagogue, walking all the time and everything. We visited twice a day, so you got to know people pretty well. This person had a hole in the torso big enough to take 3 rolls of Kerlex. You could see the heartbeat. And that hole needed to be redressed and refilled twice a day. The extent that people will go to support their family, to be together, to live their faith, it was really extraordinary. And that resonating with the men under the bridge led me to notice that I wasn't really living my faith quite this much, that it wasn't really integrated for me, and there was conflict. So that when in the Anglican there was an ad for a parish nurse at St. James, I responded. I had no clue what a parish nurse was, but it sounded like that might work. At St. James, there had been a parish nurse since 1999. Gloria Weave had been there, and she had done the parish nursing role as well as being a hands-on nurse for their drop-in. So she did actual foot care for the drop-in, hands-on care for the drop-in, and she also did the parish nursing. And at some point she decided this is enough, so that she would carve off. And that's why the parish nurse part got teased out and advertised for and became me. And Gloria still was there doing the hands-on care. It turns out there's a little bit of navigating how you do things when one person's been there for like 18 years and the other person comes in to share. Just saying. Anyway, that's how I ended up at St. James. And I truly did find it gave me more alignment between my spiritual life, my values, and the work I was trying to do. But it also was way new learning. I was really good at home visiting. I can go to any stranger at any nursing home, any hospital, any house. I got no problem at all. But I knew nothing about downtown people, encampments, opiate crisis, frontline nursing, nothing about that. And at St. James, when I was there, the staff was 50 people. We had staff meetings every Tuesday morning, and the table was full. There was like 14 part-time custodians as well as the property manager. It was like really complicated, a lot of voices, and a lot of Anglican hierarchy stuff that was like pretty new to, like I just knew how to be a little nurse. That's all I knew. So there was lots of new learning. So I brought skills to the table, but there was tremendous learning, which Gloria helped me with, and I learned from groups in the field. But I did have better alignment with values and things. So some of the places I learned from is actually when you're at a big outfit that has a staff of 55, you're almost like an occupational health nurse. There's some bits that are like the Joint Committee on Health and Safety sort of stuff that you're doing. There's training to do. There were like 4 services on Sundays to cover. As Cheryle said at her church, the 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock people, they were entirely different people. They didn't speak to each other. So I would go to both services, and sometimes the 1:30 Chinese service and sometimes the 4:30 evensong. And then I was on, several committees like outreach or like the women's group, things that were relevant to the work. So you're paid for 20 hours a week, but basically you've exceeded 24 hours a week before you started doing anything or figured out what the hell you're there for. So there was navigating all of that was new. And in any church you go to, there's going to be comparable figuring it out and seeing where you fit and how you contribute. One good inn that Gloria pointed me to was the Street Nurse Network. And that was an informal outfit of nurses who do frontline work. And I went to their meetings and learned from them. And so out of that, I learned and got connections at Streets to Homes, at Street Health. I joined the Shelter Housing Justice Network meetings, the Health Providers Against Poverty meetings. I got to make contacts at Toronto Public Health. So eventually I actually sort of knew people and knew how to do stuff. So when the Street Nurse Network wanted to push for us having sharps containers in the parks, they asked me to do a delegation at City Hall. And we got the first big, shaped like a mailbox, yellow sharps container in St. James Park. Of course, I hadn't figured out about how you get it emptied. The company that gives you the thing would like to send a truck to take away the old and give you a new empty one for $80 a month. That didn't, not so good. So I made friends at Toronto Public Health, and they would let me carry up the old bucket, and they would give me a new bucket. And since I left them, we had to come up with a new thing. And I had made drop-in visits to all the businesses, all of the residents around the park to say, we're thinking of doing this, to try to not get some NIMBY resistance, to get everybody on board. So very shortly after we had our lovely bucket in the park, it would fill up to the point where you couldn't even open the door, because all those companies like the dentists and stuff around the park who had little sharps containers, they go, how cool is this? And they dump theirs in and fill up my big box. Anyway, you didn't need to know that, but that's
not surprised.
So in terms of vulnerable people, when I was brand new, there was this elegant Black woman from the Caribbean, well-spoken, intelligent, living on the sidewalk outside the church. And her problem was the problem that a lot of displaced people have. She didn't have anything to do with her stuff. When you go to a shelter, you're allowed 2 small bags. There's no storage, that's it, 2 small bags. And she felt she could see St. James has money. Look at this big place. Come on. What I want is one of those big plastic boxes, like you put the salt in for salting the road, to put my stuff in. That's what I want. And I want you as the nurse to write for it, to advocate for it, and we'll do this. And she was pretty high pressure about it. And it really wasn't going anywhere, and it was pretty awkward. Anyway, I did make connections with her. I did, through her, get to know MDOT, Streets to Homes, all the facilities that do outreach to someone who has mental health needs, housing needs, living on the street, and had coordinated a group of people who all knew her, and we were working on things. I wasn't getting the plastic box, but we're working on things. And the community psychiatrist who traveled on a red motorcycle was coming to see her. So got my psychiatrist coming to the park on his red motorcycle to see her. And we had all things in place. And the park people shoved her away. The city facilities, they're not always friendly. And some of them feel it's their, job to patrol the park, and they put notices up that people would be picked up or evicted. And just when I had my little team coming together, she got shoveled off to Buffalo, sort of thing. So when I retired, she was still around. She had been to sistering. I had visited her. She was in a hospital on a psych bed for 3 months, where I visited her there. She and I had an ongoing relationship for 6 years, during none of which was she properly housed. So that was sort of a seminal relationship, and pretty humbling. Now, when Dean Stout was the dean, there was evidently quite a posh couple that he and the vicar knew, and they hadn't been to church much, and they sent me out as the parish nurse to go see about these isolated people who were terrific. But it turns out one of them was quite physically disabled by Parkinson's, and the other one was physically, mentally disabled, had memory, cognitive problems. And they were basically pretty isolated. They couldn't get to church. They hadn't even thought about trying to get to church in a long time. And they didn't have a doctor, and they didn't have medications squared away, and they didn't, and they didn't, and they didn't. And over a period of 2 years, we found a geriatric specialist doctor who would visit them. We got their medications squared away. We got deafness addressed, blindness addressed, volunteers for this and that. I found their best friends who were actually their resource people, and those people got declared POA. And they knew about a brother who was off towards Kinty, and we hooked up with the brother. So by the end of 2 years, the brother was living in an assisted residence, nursing home sort of place, and they moved there to be with the brother. So there was a trajectory of knowing community services, hooking people up, doing home visits, establishing trust, learning what the other players were, and eventually they moved off, and I visited them at the nursing home in Kinty once when I was on my way to the States. So that was another case that I think of. I and one of my friends from St. James, who is a psychotherapist, worked together to set up the lay pastoral visitor group. They had a lot of training from us, from each other, and we ended up with about a dozen people who had really quite a viable pastoral group that reported through the clergy, but helped reach out to the congregation and beyond. I think that's enough about me. I think we should move on to her.
Thank you, Lanadee. I learned a lot more about what you have done in the past, and thank you for that. I am currently in my 10th year as a volunteer parish nurse at the Anglican Church of St. Nicholas. Elizabeth mentioned that I worked for 30 plus years at Moorelands Camp, and I really enjoyed that. It was a little bit of everything. It was pediatric nursing, seniors. Sometimes we had seniors volunteering or working. One year we had a newborn on site, and it was a bit of public health, health and safety, just a little bit about everything. And so, and it was in a place that was nature, and kids could connect with nature. And it was just explosive to see the impact that nature was having on kids. One night I had the opportunity to take a child to the local hospital. It was like 12 o'clock and we were driving back. And I was driving, and he kept looking out the window up at the sky. And it was a beautiful, it was an August night. It was cool, very cool, but a beautiful starry night. And finally he looked up and asked me if they were street lights in the sky. He didn't know what a star was. So try and explain to somebody what a star is. It was challenging. It was just another little part of nursing that I hadn't really thought of. But it really instilled in me the wholeness of health, mind, body, and spirit. I am absolutely honored and thrilled to be entrusted as the parish nurse at St. Nicholas. My first day as parish nurse was actually January the 14th, 2014, and I'll never forget it. It was a Tuesday. The temperature was minus 17 degrees Celsius with a wind chill of minus 32. Most of us wouldn't have even wanted to venture out on a day like that. And we wondered if our guests would arrive, but arrive they did. and most were not dressed for this extreme cold. People arrived with exposed faces, ears, hands, and they were red from the cold. One guest arrived wearing running shoes held together with duct tape. And I'm going to use some names, but they are not the names of the actual guests, but the situations are real. Ron told me rather proudly that he never paid more than $3 for a pair of shoes. He just wore extra socks to keep warm. And on this day, he said his feet were a bit cold, but they would warm. To save on the cost of TTC tickets, he walked the 40 minutes to the lunch. Ron stated that the hot food was well worth the effort. As a result of this day, perhaps we could provide warm hats, mitts and gloves, scarves, and socks for our guests. Now, we do not have the resources or space to manage a clothing room. And so the priest and myself decided that that just wasn't going to work out. But 10 years later, these new items are still provided and very much appreciated. Last winter, I happened to observe a lady who I shall call Sally. She chose a hat and a scarf. They weren't a set, but they were similar coloring. Initially, she was very hesitant. She was concerned how she would look. A volunteer showed her a mirror and reassured her that lady looked very good on her. Sally told the volunteer that she felt warm and toasty in her new hat and new scarf. A blood pressure clinic is held at each of our lunches. And most of our guests have been diagnosed with hypertension. Tom was on medication for hypertension. However, his blood pressure was still high, and although it wasn't stroke level, I was concerned about it. And in conversation, Tom told me he was only taking his medication every other day so that it could go further. And this was an educational opportunity to discuss the need for compliance. On follow-up visits, you could tell that he was taking the medication as directed because his hypertension was controlled. Most of our guests cannot afford a blood pressure monitor kit, so I would suggest that they, and still suggest that they monitor at their pharmacy, but keep a record of the results. During COVID lockdown, the pharmacies removed all their monitors, and doctors were only doing telephone visits. The first spring in COVID, I became concerned about our guests that had hypertension. So I set up a table underneath the trees on the lawn, and wearing the required gear of mask, face shield, gown, and gloves, checked blood pressures. The first day, 5 out of 7 had high blood pressures. And this resulted in referring them back to their doctors. Eric came back and reported that his doctor had increased his medication and that he had a follow-up appointment. At the follow-up appointment, the doctor commented that this was a good thing that we were doing for our guests. And blood pressure clinics for the congregation have also detected hypertension, resulting in referrals to their doctors. A benefit of the blood pressure clinics is that it opens up an opportunity for the guests to discuss other health concerns, and these have a wide range of topics. Some of them are diabetes and nutrition, and even mental health diagnosis. Peter approached me with something that he was very anxious about. He had lost contact with his brother and wanted to reach out to him, but was hesitant that he might be rejected. He did have an old address, and after listening to his current concerns, I suggested that he might want to write a letter to the address that he had, inviting his brother to reconnect. He later told me that he had written the letter, but he had mailed it 4 days prior to our talking, but hadn't heard anything. Now, right away, he went to the fact that his brother was going to reject him. But I suggested that the address that he had was a rural address and that mail can be quite slow in rural areas. So he decided he would try and be a bit more patient. At a following luncheon, Peter's spirits were very high. He had heard from his brother and was planning a visit with him. And I was really pleased that his spirits were now feeling better and he was much more calm. Educational events for our congregation have included topics such as anaphylaxis, rosary making, hypertension, self-care for the caregiver, which was really eye-opening for me because most of us think that as caregivers, we should always put ourselves before others, but they finally understood that if we don't care for ourselves, we get drained and we are unable to be a caregiver. And that is not being selfish. And we have also done one on just general mental health wellness. But frequently, the education is on one-on-one. And an interesting one that I had, and I found it a bit of a challenge, was that David was very concerned that his two teenagers were not taking hand washing seriously. And this was during COVID, or just before COVID. David was worried that his teens and their friends would bring unwanted germs into the house. And lecturing was not getting any cooperation. So I said, just give me a few minutes. Let me go see what I can come up with. And so I provided him with some literature and a poster that showed a hand. And it showed around the hand where germs can be contacted, such as bus railings, school lockers, computers, cell phones, doorknobs, and the like. I suggested that he just put this information on a place where it might be read by the teenagers and not to say anything, because as most of us know, teenagers don't like to be lectured to. They really like to learn on their own. David came back and reported that the teens and their friends had seen the material, had read it, and were now washing their hands when they came into the house and before they had snacks. It reduced his anxiety greatly. Another educational piece concerned advocacy. Our older parishioners are very savvy on their health, on exercise, nutrition, and keeping medical appointments. But they were coming to me with specific health concerns and specific questions about their health concerns because they didn't want to bother their doctors with trivial questions. So I reassured them that their doctor would welcome these questions and suggested that they keep a running list of questions that they could take with them to their next doctor's appointment, that this would demonstrate that they were taking an active role in their health. Barbara took her list to her doctor and was thrilled that her doctor was willing to take the time to answer her questions. In today's world of technology, we tend to want everything at our fingertips. We text each other, we communicate through Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp, what's that other one? Instagram, among many others that I'm not even aware of. The art of listening is fading. During COVID, had the opportunity to speak with a senior who we had not seen for quite a while. During COVID, we had takeaway lunches. George looked sad. He was using a cane, walking slowly. His physical appearance was disheveled, and he had an unruly beard. Normally, he was very clean-shaved and rather a savvy dresser. We chatted for about 25 minutes. His arthritis was causing him immense discomfort. He preferred to treat with natural products, which really were not providing him any relief, and he would not consider taking any medications prescribed by his doctor. And there wasn't much I could do for him, so I just stood and I listened to what he was saying. Towards the end of the conversation, I told him that I was sorry for what he was experiencing and that I wished I had a magic wand that could just wave and take away his ills. He looked at me and said, "I know you can't, but I thank you for listening to me." And this interaction once again reminded me of the importance of just listening and being present. Sometimes there are no answers needed or wanted. As parish nurses, we promote the wholeness of health in mind, body, and spirit. At St. Nick's, we have a women's support group, which I facilitate. This women get together monthly, and we share our concerns and learn from each other's experiences. We open and close with prayer. We have a reflection or educational activity. One month, I suggested that each person write down 5 coping strategies that they have tried. We then made a list of these strategies. The following month, this list was reviewed, and we did an exercise to decide if they fit into a category or categories. And these categories were mind, body, or spirit. At the end of the exercise, I asked if there was any observations to be made. The group decided that each strategy had an overreaching effect in more than one category, thus promoting wholeness of health in mind, body, and spirit. As parish nurses, we stand on holy ground. We walk alongside the people we serve. We connect without judging, meeting people where they are with curious compassion. And in doing this, we hopefully are promoting the wholeness of health in mind, body, and spirit. Now, I know not all congregations have a parish nurse. And the reality is that most of parish nurses are not paid. And that can be a barrier. But there are some choices that parishes can make to promote a caring and inclusive community. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I think it's back to you, Lanadee.
So, Elizabeth, I have this quote from Deborah Patterson that I want to read, but I thought first I wanted to give you a little list. At the last National Parish Nurse Conference I went to, they had people from across the country stand up and say what they were doing. And it gives you a feel for the breadth of the things that parish nurses do, because each community is different, each congregation is different. So the parish nurse could be as a coordinator of caregiving and volunteers and visiting, with the special charisma of being an integrator of faith and health, or exercise and meditation, fitness. She pointed out that the local public health unit is a great resource for things. Then there's training greeters, wardens, sides people in mental health first aid, in CPR, and use of the AED, in naloxone administration. Sometimes you can do workshops on advanced care planning, or preparation of a kit in case you need to call 911. Do you have all your ducks in a row? What you're going to give the paramedics when they turn up? Others do workshops or ongoing groups on grief, bereavement care, divorce care. Nancy Truscott has been doing that for about 15 years. Hundreds of people have come through bereavement care and divorce care, St. Paul's Bloor Street. Peer support groups like Cheryle runs. There are actual people who do research and gathering data and publishing things too. We do liturgies, as in St. Luke's Day, or as in healing and anointing, and using music as a healing modality.